Mentioned a couple of the players and contracts that are in. Let's take a look at the biggest contracts in MLB history. And you see on that list the a lot of interesting ones. A-Rod hits the jackpot twice. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that'll set you up for several lifetimes.
Which of these guys, you got 10 guys here, if you include A-Rod twice, which ones would you say through the length of the contract, who did the best or contributed the best?
Well, I guess you'd say Trout. I mean, he's still an MVP talent, and he's up in the top three almost every year.
How many playoff years has he had? None?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. And that's not to say that the Indians signing Lindor couldn't set them up for playoff runs, but I just think it makes it really hard to build around him and to keep, so when Shane-Bieber commands Kluber money or right. higher, do you have to let him go because that's the question.
I think on the Kluber one, I think fans are upset that they didn't get anything in return. On the other hand, they probably had, not that they panicked, but they finally got an offer, and they didn't know how healthy Kluber was going to be when he returned.
True. I mean, in their defense, he was coming off the kind of year that didn't exactly maximize his value.
How many average fans would know that Nolan-Arenado signed an 8-year deal for $260 million?
Or how many would actually know how really good he is?
That's another. Well, there's that.
Yeah.
So where does Lindor fit in on
It's a great question. If you could get him for Cabrera numbers, I'd say you would do it, right?
Well, he's 8 years, $247 million. They got a triple crown out of him, but they lose 100 games almost consistently since then.
But how long ago was the Cabrera deal?
2016.
The two most recent deals, I believe, there are Cole and Harper.
Correct.
And look where those are.
Well, I think don't you look at starting pitching differently than you would an everyday
player? Yeah, a little
player?
bit, but those two are fairly close, right? 330
Gerrit-Cole
and 324.
is 9 years, 324, and Harper is 13 years, $330 million.
So.
I think the strange one to me is Manny-Machado. Maybe I don't see him playing up.
Yeah,
how good
he might be a guy that we need to see more because I felt the same way when I heard that. And the fact that, the market, I lived out there, and granted I lived out there a long time ago, but
the sun is still the same.
But it's still not the biggest market in the world. I know it's still considerably bigger than Cleveland in population.
216-575-0403. So how important is Lindor to the operation? The ideal contract for the team is Jose Ramirez.
Sure, and we know any good agent's not going to tell Lindor that he should take much less than what Harper's getting.
Right. Do you sense that there's pressure from the union now, like there apparently was with Tommy?
I think because we're so far out that it probably hasn't come to that. But certainly, if they get the idea that he's underselling himself, I'm sure there'll be conversations had. Because all it takes is a Bryce-Harper contract, and now everybody that's really every all-star player whose contract's coming to an end can go to their organization and say, okay, so I know I'm not going to get that much, but I should get 90% of that
sure.
or 85% of that.
The thing about Lindor is, my guess is if he signed an 8-year deal, and I'm just making that number up, that he will play through the length of it and play at that high quality. If he loses a half a step in the field, I don't think that'll matter the way the game is played right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, we saw Omar play to 40. We played for 20-some years.
24 years.
And, Lindor is obviously a better player than Omar Vizquel, so the deterioration of him would still be a pretty good talent going into his 7th, 8th, 9th year of a contract. I don't think they have to worry about that. It's also not a guy physically that you look at and you worry about his body or,
right. And his love for the game.
Any of that. Yeah, just the way he plays the game.
I get sense on some players that their love of the game is a fake out. I don't sense that it is with Lindor at all.
No, I certainly is not. But he's smart. I mean, listen, he can say he loves Cleveland and everything else, and I'm sure he does. And Cleveland loves him back. The Indians love him. They think he's one of the great players they've ever had in their organization, I'm sure. But that still doesn't change the fact that if you're paying him $40 million or $35 million, what else are you building around? Like right now, their payroll is going to be $85 or $90 million.
They lopped off $44 million in the last 2 years.
And, they lost a minority owner. And maybe you know more about how that's affected them. Like, is that why the payroll has taken a dive, or was this a recalibration that would have happened regardless?
I think the interesting part of that is the Sherman, who now owns the Kansas City Royals. I thought he was there to learn the business and help out and all that stuff. No, he was setting it up apparently to buy the Indians. So who knew that the Indians were, not that they were close to being sold, but the thought that Paul Dolan was even thinking about it.
Yeah, and maybe that's still a possibility. I mean, maybe it's also possible that they would find another investor. I just don't see it being significant enough that they could afford to keep this guy.
So if you got...
Without running the payroll up to 150 or 160 million a year, which they contend that they can't do that long term and stay viable.
Right. So what if they announced today that Francisco Lindor was signed by the Indians for whatever that number is? Would that immediately, would the switchboards, they don't have switchboards anymore. Would the phones, no, they don't have phones anymore. Would the phones be ringing off the hook with people buying season tickets? I mean, they have to consider that too, and how significant is that number?
I feel like those numbers jump when it's a guy coming from when it's a great player
as opposed to your
coming from
own?
another organization.
Good point.
So I wonder if that would be a huge jump, and I sort of doubt that it would be. This is still a tough market for those first 3 months of the year, regardless of what anybody wants to say. The fact that these games sold out, Les, for what was
455 years.
It's one of the most
455
amazing
games.
things I've ever seen in sports.
What, did it happen in Cleveland?
Yes. Yeah, that it happened here without a dome,
right,
with people sitting in that weather in April, May, and sometimes, unfortunately,
and they can wait long
June.
enough to see if they'll be okay once you get to May and June.
Yeah.
So